Well, good morning and welcome. Cathy is here with me this morning, so you're getting another Sunday morning with just Jamie, which means I have been left unsupervised with a kind of rock star and an idea that has been getting steadily larger or weak. And this one really did begin with something quite small. My iPhone told me this morning that apparently I'm back at work. It didn't say that, obviously. It informed me that my walking distance has suddenly gone back up to about 2.8 miles per day and that I'm climbing 8 flights of stairs again. And I thought, yes, school has definitely started. But this first week back has been different for me. I've spent several years running a Developmental Maths Learning Centre along my work as a RSP teacher and IEP case manager. I had a classroom. Students came to me. There was a place that was recognisably mine, not in a territorial sense of my room, my rules, but in the relational sense. Students knew what happened there. They knew what kind of help was available. They knew that they could come in confused. They knew what my routines meant. They knew where things were. They knew me. I knew them. The room accumulated history. This year, there are no learning centres on my campus. A strict adherence to policies governing minimum enrolments for classes. Yes, you see, makes sense. So I don't have my own classroom. I'm carrying a maximum caseload, working across 4 maths sections and 5 class periods, and providing push-in services in other teachers' classrooms. I've never worked only as a push-in RSP teacher before, and something during this first week I realised I'm at stage 0. I don't have scripts for this yet. So I suppose this morning's conversation is me beginning to grow them. I've also been watching teachers begin their school year. And I want to be careful about the word watching because I wasn't evaluating them. This is a criticism of my colleagues or teachers. I wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, I would have done that differently. I was noticing something because I've spent much of the summer writing about relational fields, relational fracture, field foreclosure, and what happens when meaning either does or does not accumulate between people. And then suddenly I was sitting inside classrooms watching relational fields being built in real time. And once I saw that, my sometimes annoying autistic brain wouldn't let me stop seeing it. Patterns. Because those opening days are doing so much more than establishing procedures. Yes, we're explaining where students sit and we're explaining bathroom passes and grading policies and mobiles and Chromebooks and late work pencils, attendance, homework, whatever else needs explaining. But underneath all of that, something much larger is happening. Every student in that classroom is collecting information. Does this teacher see me? Does this room hold me? What happens if I don't understand something? Can I ask a question without being embarrassed? Can I get something wrong here? What happens when somebody laughs at somebody else? Who gets corrected? Who gets protected? Who gets believed? Who gets ignored? And one of the things I've been thinking about all week is, what's the friend to bully ratio in this room? And what does the teacher do about it? Because students are extraordinarily good at field reading. They may not use that language, may never be consciously able to formulate any of these questions, but they're learning the answers very quickly. And those answers become the conditions on which everything else we're trying to teach them has to happen. Now, this connects directly to something I wrote about on the outside this week. I've been thinking about stage 3 in Gestalt language development, the point at which language begins becoming transferable. A word isn't only meaningful inside the original Gestalt anymore, it can travel. Something learned there becomes available here. And that sounds like a linguistic achievement, because it is. But I've increasingly come to understand it as a temporal achievement as well. Yesterday becomes available today. Something doesn't have to be rebuilt from nothing simply because the moment in which it was established has ended. And relationships depend upon that. Classrooms depend upon that. A classroom has to accumulate. On Monday, I learned something about you. On Tuesday, that learning should still matter. We have an interaction on Wednesday that changes something between us. Thursday should begin differently because Wednesday happened. This is what I mean when I say the field learns, not mystically. The classroom doesn't have a nervous system floating somewhere above the ceiling tiles, obviously. The learning exists in expectations, habits, interpretations, shared references, boundaries, repairs, jokes, trust, all those tiny little adjustments through which 30-something people gradually stop entering the same physical room as strangers. The classroom acquires history. And once it does, that history begins carrying some of the work. That's incredibly important educationally. Because I think about what happens when it doesn't. I've mostly written about the relational fracture in intimate relationships. But sitting in classrooms this week made me realise how easily it can happen educationally. Imagine a student struggles on Monday. She tells the teacher what's happening. The teacher understands. Maybe they have a really good conversation. Maybe something gets repaired. Chronos can record every event perfectly. Monday, second period. Conversation happened, student explained, teacher listened, problem solved. Fine. Then Thursday comes. The same disability-related need appears again, and the teacher interprets it as defiance. The event was remembered, but what the event was supposed to change didn't survive. That's relational fracture. Or a student discloses something important about how she learns, the teacher responds compassionately. But that disclosure never becomes part of how future instruction is organised. Or an accommodation is provided when somebody explicitly reminds the teacher about it, but never becomes part of the classroom's ordinary understanding of that student. Or bullying happens. The incident is handled. Everybody can document that the incident was handled, but the social ecology of the room remains exactly the same. Chronos says, we dealt with that. Kairos asks, what became different because we dealt with that? It's not the same question. And the students, they know the difference. And that's what made these opening days suddenly feel so consequential to me. A classroom in August has almost no accumulated relational history. There's nothing much buffering any particular interaction yet. If a teacher who has known me for 8 months has a difficult morning and snaps at me, I might have hundreds of other interactions through which I can interpret that moment. He's tired. Something happened. That's unusual for him. A student on day 2 doesn't have that. The data set is tiny. So, every event carries enormous architectural weight. A teacher laughs with me, data. A teacher learns my name, data. A teacher repeatedly gets my name wrong, data. Someone makes fun of another student and the teacher ignores it, data. I ask for help and receive it without humiliation, data. I ask for help and everybody knows I needed help, data. The field is being constructed from tiny samples. And that field is going to determine what becomes possible later. Because if I didn't feel safe enough to expose confusion, how exactly are you going to teach me? If meaning can't stick relationally, how is meaning supposed to accumulate academically? I don't think those are separate questions. And here's where the whole thing turned around for me. Because I've been thinking about students reading these classrooms, and then I realised I'm reading them too. Every period I enter another teacher's classroom, I'm asking many of the same questions. Am I welcome here? Is there room for me too here? Does this teacher understand why I'm here? Can I actually perform my role here? Does this person see me as a colleague? Does this classroom have space for special education, or merely space for the special education teacher's body? Am I just some random adult in the room? And I need to say this gently because there are many teachers who are wonderful collaborators. There are teachers and classrooms where I walk in and the field is immediately open. We are both teachers. These are our students. We talk, we adjust. I can't move toward a student without feeling as though I've crossed an invisible border. The student's IEP is not an interruption of the lesson. It's part of how we're thinking about the lesson. These rooms, they feel different. But there are other rooms where I don't feel welcome. There are teachers who experience the RSP teacher entering their classroom as an intrusion. And listen to that language. Their classroom, their lesson, their pacing, their students. And here comes the resource specialist program teacher with an individualized educational program for a student. An RSP teacher is there to deliver the services contained within the RSP, with the accommodations defined by the IEP, with goals, services that have to happen by law. Or the student whose needs may require something to change. And suddenly we have a structural contradiction, because I've been assigned to enter that classroom precisely because some students require something beyond what the existing instructional field independently provides. But sometimes the implicit condition for my being welcomed is, don't change anything. Come in, help them, don't disrupt, don't interrupt, don't alter the pacing, don't ask me to reorganize anything, don't make the IEP too visible, don't require intentional work on an IEP goal if it interferes with what I was already planning to do. And that creates a very peculiar form of inclusion. The RSP teacher's body has been admitted. The RSP teacher's function has been foreclosed. And this is what I think special education is, much more sophisticated conversation about push-in services, because we are very good at measuring services spatially and temporally. Where was the student? Where was the special education teacher? How many minutes was the service provided in general education? Was the student in the least restrictive environment? These are important questions, but they don't tell us everything, because proximity is not a relational field. A specialist standing 3 meters away from a student doesn't automatically constitute meaningful access to specialized instruction. A body entering a classroom for 45 minutes is not necessarily a service relationship, and minutes don't automatically produce continuity. Suppose the student has to reconstruct every time I arrive. Who is Dr. H? Why is she here? Is she my teacher? Am I supposed to go to her? Will everybody know I have an IEP if she comes over? Can I ask her for help? Is my classroom teacher comfortable with me working with her? Will she remember what we were doing last time? Then some portion of those service minutes are being spent reconstructing infrastructure. Every encounter has to carry its own history. That's expensive. And I don't mean financially, I mean cognitively, relationally, instructionally. All right. And this has led me to a question I wasn't asking before this week. Can the relational field of the classroom hold the IEP? Because an IEP is more than a document. It contains claims about a student. The student needs additional processing time. That student needs information presented differently. The student needs support beginning a task. This student requires explicit instruction here. The student is working towards this goal. This behavior means something different when understood through this disability. And those meanings have to become transferable. They have to leave the IEP meeting and enter the maths class. They have to leave the PDF and enter third person. They have to survive Tuesday and still matter on Friday. Otherwise, the IEP exists in chronos. The meeting happened, the document was signed, the accommodation is listed, the service minutes are recorded. Nice. But Kairos asks, what became different in the student's educational world because this IEP exists? That is a much harder question. And I think relational fields determine part of the answer. And then there is one more layer to this. One I've been deciding how much I want to talk about, because when I ask whether I feel safe in another teacher's classroom, I'm not only talking professionally. I'm a trans woman. I'm also 6'7". And those two facts apparently create an extraordinary linguistic challenge for some people. There are people who can comfortably say Jamie is 6'7". There are people who can presumably say that teacher is 6'7". But the sentence, she is 6'7", somehow becomes impossible. And I say that gently. But I also need to say it clearly. There are colleagues who will not use my pronouns. There are people with whom I cannot assume that my humanity will be respected. That changes the field. Because now I'm doing precisely what the students are doing. I'm entering the room and gathering data. Does this person see me? Am I safe here? What happens if something occurs? Will this person protect my dignity? Do I have to spend part of my cognitive capacity monitoring myself in this room? Can I simply teach here? Right? I would think that matters. It matters because relational safety is not something teachers provide to students from some position outside the field. Teachers are inside it too. RSP teachers are inside it. Paraprofessionals are inside it. Students are inside it, of course. Everybody is affecting what everybody else can access. But power is distributed equally. Vulnerability exists throughout this system. And there's something almost painfully appropriate about pronouns appearing in the same week that I've been writing about words, what words carry. Because she is a tiny word. 3 letters. Grammatically trivial. But the word carries something. Recognition. When somebody refuses the word, the problem isn't that they can't pronounce the sound. The linguistic capacity isn't. It's intact. Something else has been refused. The meaning the word would carry into the field has been foreclosed. And I think students experience versions of this too. Perhaps not through pronouns, but through the meanings adults refuse to let travel. Right? I need more time. I'm overwhelmed. I didn't understand. I wasn't refusing. I need help. That person is bullying me. The words can arrive perfectly, clearly. The question is whether the field permits those words to change anything. Understanding isn't complete merely because meaning arrives. Something has to hold the arrival. So that's where I am at the end of my first week. Stage 0. And I didn't mean that as a cute metaphor. I mean, genuinely, I don't have a sufficiently developed script garden for this service model yet. I've had scrapes for students coming into my learning centre. I've had scrapes for beginning intervention, for helping someone who walks in frustrated. I have scripts for maths anxiety, for a student who says, I can't do this. Scripts for turning that into, let's find the last thing that still makes sense and build from there. Those scripts grew inside a particular field. My room, my routines, my relational architecture becomes ours. But now you need different ones. Scripts for entering someone else's classroom. Scripts for joining without disappearing. Scripts for helping without accidentally undermining another teacher. Scripts for making my role legible to students. Scripts for approaching a student without publicly marking that student as the special education kid. Scripts for leaving whilst preserving continuity. For returning 3 days later without beginning again. And for advocating when an IEP need genuinely does not interrupt the planned flow of instruction. Most importantly, scripts for the classroom where I'm welcomed. Not for the classroom where I'm tolerated. And unfortunately, scripts for the classroom where I know that the person in front of me doesn't fully recognize me. Now, that's a lot of gardening. But I think I know the question I want to carry into this year is not, how do I become good at pushing? That's too procedural. It's not even, how do I support my students in other people's classrooms? That's closer, but it's still incomplete. I think the question is, how do I make the field portable? How do I create enough continuity that when I appear beside a student in algebra on Thursday, Wednesday comes with me? How do I make our previously work available without reconstructing the entire relationship? How do I help a student know that I still know her even though we are standing in someone else's room? How do I build a relational field that can travel through corridors, up 8 flights of stairs, and across 2.8 miles of campus walking, through 5 periods, 4 math sections, and all the little territories that schools create? I don't know yet. That's the honest answer. My script garden hasn't grown. But stage 0 isn't nothing. Stage 0 is the field before language has organized itself. It's the whole arriving before I know how to traverse it. And right now, I can feel the whole. So perhaps that's what I want us to notice as another school year begins. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, a paraprofessional counselor, administrator, therapist, student, RSP teacher. Pay attention to what's accumulating, not simply what happened. What did it change? If a student trusted you with something on Tuesday, is that trust present in how you interpret her on Friday? If you repaired something, did the repair become part of the relationship? If an IEP tells you something about how a student accesses learning, has that information entered the classroom's architecture, its ecology? Or does somebody have to remind you every time? If an RSP teacher enters your classroom, is she entering as another educator responsible for these students, or as a random adult, an intrusion you have agreed to tolerate? And perhaps most importantly, who is spending cognitive energy determining whether they're safe in their room? Because that energy is coming from somewhere. The student monitoring for humiliation is not using that attention for algebra. The autistic student reconstructing the social rules every period is not using that capacity for writing. The RSP teacher negotiating whether she's permitted to perform her role isn't spending that capacity on instruction. The trans teacher monitoring whether the adults around her recognize her humanity isn't simply standing there unaffected whilst the monitoring happens somewhere else. Capacity is conditional. Access is ecological. And classrooms are ecologies. I started this week with our classroom. And at first, that felt mostly logistical. Where do I put things? Where do students find me? How exactly am I supposed to carry everything I need across campus? And apparently the answer to that one is 2.8 miles and 8 flights of stairs. But by the end of the week, losing the room had made something visible that I hadn't quite seen before. I had mistaken the room for the field. It wasn't. The room helped me cultivate one. Routines helped, consistency helped, history embedded, that helped. But if the field depends entirely upon 4 walls that belong to me, then it can't serve the students I now have to meet elsewhere. So this year may require something different from me. Not rebuilding the learning centre everywhere I go, I can't do that. And certainly not controlling other teachers' classrooms, I shouldn't do that. But learning how to carry enough relational continuity with me that meaning doesn't have to start over every time I walk through another door. Perhaps asking, sometimes uncomfortably, whether the field I'm entering is capable of holding what my students and I bring into it. Because inclusion isn't accomplished when the door opens. Special education isn't accomplished when the specialist teacher enters. Safety isn't accomplished because nobody said anything openly cruel today. And understanding isn't complete because the words arrived. The field has to be able to change. That change has to accumulate. Tomorrow has to inherit something from today. Otherwise, we keep beginning again. And children can build an education entirely out of beginnings. Neither can teachers. So that's where I am this Sunday morning. School has started. My legs have noticed. My iPhone has noticed. And somewhere in between those 8 flights of stairs, I'm beginning a new script garden. Not simply for how to push in, for how to enter, how to remain, how to be recognized, how to recognize, how to help the field learn, and how to know when a field has already decided that some of us kind of belong inside it. Because before we ask whether meaning can stick, perhaps we need to ask, what's holding it? So I'll see you next Sunday.